Did it feel?
Everybody loved Roger Stern's thing. I loved Roger Stern's thing. At the time, I thought Roger Stern was the best Spider-Man writer since Stan Lee. You know, guys like James Madison, have really, kicked into gear since then. But at the time, I thought Roger Stern was the best guy since Stan Lee. Matter of fact, when the editor came in, Danny Fingeroth came in and said to me, Roger Stern is leaving Spider-Man to take over the Avengers. He says, so I needed a new Spider-Man writer. I said, oh, good luck with that, because you have to be an idiot to follow Roger Stern. So, famous last words.
Welcome to the Comics Cube, everyone. Today I am talking to Tom DeFalco. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm doing very well. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I'm very excited about this because my impression of you comes from Bullpen Bulletins in the 90s. And I'm excited to find out how much of that is accurate.
Well, the part about me being a blowhard who has no idea what's going on around him, that's pretty accurate. The part of me enjoying pizza, beer, and with the El Stinkos, and not so much the El Stinkos, but the pizza and beer, yeah.
What about the cigars?
Well, those are the El Stinkos.
Those El Stinkos? Okay. Went over my innocent little mind back then, what they were.
Yeah. The truth was, I had given up smoking probably a couple of years before they started to do the comic strip. But Rick Parker, he remembered me, being in the office smoking cigars. So that's how he wanted to draw me.
That's yeah. It left an impression. So there you go. What made you want to do comics, and what made you fall in love with comics in the first place?
That's it. That is a hard one. I noticed comics at an early age, but they were the newspaper comic strips. Things like The Phantom, Mandrake the Magician, Pogo Possum, On Stage by Leonard Starr. And there was just a magic to those comic strips. And I would, get the newspaper and, cut out the comic strips, hopefully after my father had read it. If he hadn't read it, there would be big trouble. I was always trying to convince him to buy, all the Sunday newspapers, because in those days they had like half a dozen Sunday newspapers, and there were a lot of Sunday comics that we didn't get because, we didn't get those newspapers. And somewhere along the line, one of my cousins, my cousin Johnny, handed me a Batman comic book, and I don't remember, I don't remember what issue it was or anything. I just remember that this Batman creature scared the heck out of me. Mysterious, thing with white eyes. Oh, wow, it's pretty scary stuff when you're like 9 or 10. And then I discovered that comic books were, anybody could buy comic books. They were on sale at the local candy store. I just hadn't noticed them before. And from then on, I was just kind of hooked.
What do you feel about that fact, that anybody could buy them back then, and like now when they're not that, I guess web comics are easy to find. Like, how do you feel about the fact that the way that the distribution has evolved?
Well, I don't like the way the distribution has evolved. The way the distribution has evolved has kind of, it's put comics in a ghetto. You can only get comic books now at comic book shops, which are, not as plentiful as they were in the 80s and 90s. Some bookstores have some comics, not a lot, but we never intended for bookstores to have a lot. We always thought, people would learn about comics at the bookstores and then go to the local comic book stores. That's when there were a lot more comic book stores. I love the fact that when I was growing up, you could walk into, we used to call them candy stores. They would sell, candy, cards, a little bit of everything, stationery, and they'd have a spinner rack of comic books. You pick up a couple of comic books and sit down and have a soda. And they, 7-Elevens had comic books. Comic books were everywhere. In the 40s and 50s, you couldn't walk past the newsstand without seeing a bunch of comics. And in those days, pretty much everybody read comic books. Soldiers read comic books. Kids read comic books. Everybody read comic books. Nowadays only 30-somethings read comic books. And I think that's kind of tragic.
Yeah, I feel like it's really weird to me because I feel like everybody reads comics in some form. If you go through Facebook and you go through your newsfeed and you see a comic, you'll read it, but you won't, aside from the 30-somethings, you won't go out of your way to go to a store and buy it.
And buy them, yeah.
Yeah.
And you said, you can get them on the web, but you have to know how to get them on the web.
That's true.
And that involves a lot of, a lot of pre-knowledge to find, the comics on the web. I think a lot of people like comics, but when I was growing up, because the comic books were 10 cents, 12 cents, 15 cents, you could buy 30, 40 titles each month. Now they're, $4 or $5. That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
And for $4 or $5, for most comic books, you're getting, part of the story, not even a full chapter of the story, kind of like sometimes a scene, sometimes a half a scene. Where in my day, you'd get at least, for your 12 cents, you'd get at least a full story, sometimes 2 or 3 stories.
I noticed that in your time as editor-in-chief, like even if you had like a 6-part story, it would be structured in such a way that every chapter, every issue would be its own self-contained story.
Yeah. We were far more interested in the actual craft of storytelling in those days. I shouldn't say that sounds like a criticism of the comic books today, which I don't mean to do because I don't read that many of them. But in those days, we focused on the craft so that every comic book should be a complete unit of entertainment that even if it was part of a bigger story, would lead you into the next story. I used to, people would look at my run on Fantastic Four and they'd say, wow, that was a never-ending story. And I said, yeah, it's a never-ending story if you looked at it one way. If you looked at it another way, there were 20-page stories with 2 pages just leading you into the next issue.
It's true.
What?
That's why it was so easy to buy monthly comics back then, because you'd have a cliffhanger, but you'd still have, because I'm thinking now that you mentioned your run on the Fantastic Four, I'm thinking of the time that you wrote the new Fantastic Four versus the Fantastic Four,
right,
374, I believe it was. And it would have been easy to stretch that out, but that one fight is that one issue, and then you moved on to the next part of the story, which doesn't have Spider-Man and Wolverine and Ghost Rider and the Hulk.
No, we were trying to make sure that every month you were experiencing something different. I think in Thor, Ron Frenz and I found that our attention span was maybe 3 issues.
Mm-hmm.
If we did anything that went beyond 3 issues, we started getting bored, and we assumed that readers would get bored. So we tried to keep everything to 1 or 2 issues, So, hey, this month we're in Asgard. Next month we're in outer space. Then we're on Earth. Then we're back in Asgard. Then we're, just bounce around a lot.
Speaking of attention spans, now that I think about it, the average attention span of a younger person continues to shrink, but comics continue to expand their storylines. You think there's something there?
Like I say, I don't want to be, the old fart who criticizes modern day comic books, but I am the old fart who criticizes modern day comic books. I look at entertainment, and around me, entertainment is speeding up, moving faster and faster and faster. Go to a movie, any movie, within 1 minute, something important happens. If it's a romance, somebody either has his heart broken or his heart thrilled within the first minute. If it's an adventure movie, pick out any James Bond film. There's a big opening. Any Mission Impossible film, any action film, something big happens right away. And that's in all entertainment except with comic books, where they started this decompressed story time where things just stretch out. And I think that part of the reason why comic book sales are not as robust as we'd like to see them these days is because they're boring to people. That even if people appreciate the writing or appreciate the art, they're bored. And they're just not sticking with it.
I'm going to move back a little bit, and I'm going to ask you, what was the comic that made you want to make comics? And who were your biggest influences?
I think that the comic book, I'm not sure if it was Fantastic Four or Thor or Spider-Man. Those two comic books were kind of coming out together at the time. And there was a magic to those comic books that I had never experienced in any other comics. I think I was about 10 or 11 when I stumbled upon my first Fantastic Fours. They were issue 3 and 4 of Fantastic
Oh,
Four.
wow. The first Fantastic Four costume.
Yeah, the first costume and the first Submariner. And there was a magic to those comic books. There was an energy to them that the DC books at the time, no other comic books had. And then when Spider-Man came out, Peter Parker was, he was just like me. He was just like, all of us. Those things made me really want to do comic books. Those and Walt Kelly's Pogo Possum, which the dialogue in those things, the artwork in those things just used to drive me crazy. So
that sounds to me like you really love Jack and Steve, but also Stan.
Yeah. I love those guys. I love their work. Over the years, I got to spend a lot of time with Stan, and as a person, I love, I'll admit I love Stan. I really like Steve because I got to spend a lot of time with Steve.
Really? What's he like?
Yeah. He was really a charming, friendly guy. I hear about this iconoclast, and I don't know who the heck anybody's talking about, but what can I tell you? Jack, I met him a couple of times, but I can't say I really knew Jack. If I had a half a dozen conversations with him, I'd be surprised if I had that many. But Jack Kirby, he helped define our craft. I used to look at Jack Kirby and I used to think, man, this is the guy. You look at Kirby and you can understand what he's thinking and how he's laying out the stories and that sort of stuff. And you can really study Jack Kirby and it can really teach you how to do comics. As opposed to somebody like Will Eisner. And I love, I knew Will was another great guy. Fabulous storyteller. But you look at Will Eisner and so many things that Will Eisner did, only Will Eisner could do. So you can't study Will Eisner and take anything. You can't steal from Will Eisner. You can steal from Jack Kirby. You can't steal from Will Eisner. Joe Kubert, again, fabulous artist. But he could do things that nobody else in the world can do. Nobody can draw an inset panel like Joe Kubert can. Joe Kubert could always do inset panels. They always work. Most people, they don't work.
I'm kidding.
Listen, these are the greats. Bob Powell. I love Bob Powell's work.
Walt Kelly. You mentioned Walt Kelly a few times. I find it fascinating because he's a guy who gets mentioned a lot. But my generation and the generations after me don't really know him too well. It doesn't really get mentioned so much. What made Walt Kelly so special?
He was a brilliant writer and a brilliant cartoonist. His artwork is just so beautiful when you look at the line work and the characterization. I mean, he had these very simple characters that were so expressive, and his writing is just so insightful, so incredible. I know these days, I guess it's Fantagraphics, reprinting his comic strips, which they're like a mastercraft on the craft of master class on the craft of comics. I'm just a goofy fanboy. I love all this stuff. I love the medium.
That's so great. One of the things I found out about you as I was preparing for this interview was that you are responsible for Archie digests, which I love. I believe those were actually my first comics, or at least some of them. Can you tell me how that came about?
Yes, I stole the idea. I think I saw, I don't remember if they were called, what they were called at the time. They weren't Dell anymore. They were Gold Key. Gold Key was doing digests, and I was working for Archie Comics, and I saw, a Donald Duck digest and a couple of other digests like that. And I went to our publisher and I said, his name was John Goldwater. I said, Mr. Goldwater, these things are perfect for us. We should be doing digests too. And he looked at him and said, "Get out of here! Don't bother me with this nonsense." And I said, "No, I really think this is a great idea." He goes, "Forget about it." And he stormed off. And I thought, okay, well, I tried. And a couple of days later, he comes and he says, "I have this brilliant idea. We're going to do." And he hands me back the books that I gave him. And I said, he says, you know what to do with these, don't you? And I'm thinking, yeah, I know what to do with them. And then he patted me on the back and he just said, just do it. And John Goldwater was he was one of the founders of the comic book industry. And he taught me so much. Just how to do comics. So I was very thankful, and he kind of like he kind of I guess he walked away, thought about it, came back, and then kind of dropped in my lap, and then we started to do Archie Digest books.
Did he eventually remember that you were the one who brought them over?
Oh, he knew when he gave me the books to hand out. He, you know, he, he knew what he was doing. You know,
What a great idea though, because like you talk about getting comics everywhere, and that was one of the ways to do it.
it was what made the Archie Digest books work was our sales department. There was a gentleman there by the name of Ben Cooperstock who looked at them and said, these are almost the size of Reader's Digest. If we paid, I don't know, X number of dollars, we could probably get them into those racks. And I didn't know what the heck he was talking about, but he did a great job in terms of getting the distribution. Comic books, well, everything all comes down to distribution. You can have a great comic book, a great idea. If you can't get it, get it out there to the public, it doesn't do anybody any good in a warehouse. And one of my problems with the industry today is the direct market. A lot of times, a new book is announced, and the direct market looks and says, "Oh, this is boring," even before it comes out, and they decide, we don't like it before it comes out, and then it comes out, and then sometimes they say, "Oh, wow, this is pretty good," but by then the book is already canceled.
Yeah.
Because it didn't get, the sales. And I can tell you time and time again, comic book fans are a cowardly and superstitious lot. And whenever they hear something is happening, they always hate it before it happens. The Spider-Man's going to get a new costume. Oh my God! I'll never read another Marvel comic book. I'll never buy another Spider-Man comic book. We got, a sack full of mails about what a terrible idea that was. But when it came out, people decided, hey, you know what? We like this. So but in those days we had a very strong newsstand and and a strong direct market. So even though the fans hated it, they were still able to get it.
What's funny? If you ever look, if you take a look at the sales charts, the comics that the hardcore online internet fans say they hate so much are almost always the highest selling.
Oh, listen, I know when I was doing Fantastic Four, all we got was terrible. What a terrible job we're doing, how horrible it is. We're so mean to the characters, and every month the sales went up. So
aren't you supposed to be mean to the characters?
I always thought so.
Exactly right. Aren't you supposed to put them through all of these difficulties and trials?
That's what I thought, because people would write to me and said, can't you ever give these guys a break? And I say, oh, they have a break. They have a break in the 30 days in between issues. They've got a great break. They're just relaxing. They're on a beach somewhere. And then on that 30th day, when the comic book comes out, that's when we drop them out and shit on
them. We're back in business.
Yeah.
So, as you were growing up, you told me that you've read Spider-Man, Thor, and the Fantastic Four. You had landmark runs on all three. How does that feel knowing that you got to work on three of the books that you loved so much, and then you worked on them for a long time?
Well, I when I it's kind of funny because when I was asked to do Spider-Man, I thought I was just going to be a fill-in writer for a couple of issues because I didn't think I had the ability to write Spider-Man like dialogue. In those days, the character was the most important thing, and every character spoke a certain way. And it was not my vision of the character; it was the character that you had to do. And I wasn't sure I could do the character. So I figured, I'm just going to be on for a couple of issues, and then they're going to realize I can't do it. Thor, Ron Frenz and I had approached the editor. We wanted to do Daredevil.
Yeah.
So we wanted to do a pitch for Daredevil, and the editor, Ralph Macchio, said that, Thor is very late. I need somebody to do a fill-in. Can you do a fill-in for Thor? And we said, yeah, we could do a fill-in on, for any book in the line. I always felt I could do a fill-in for, you name a title, I could do a fill-in for it. So we did one fill-in for Thor, and then we did a second fill-in for Thor, because the book was still late. And then Ralph said, yeah, I want you guys to do Thor. And I said, no, we can't do Thor. We don't do cosmic. He said, you just did 2 issues. And I said, but they were fill-ins. Fill-in, you name it, I can do it. But, I can ghost anybody for a month. But and I don't know if we can do cosmic things. So, he said, try it. So we did this story with the Celestials. So, hey, if we're going to try cosmic, let's try cosmic. Let's see if it works. And Fantastic Four, I got onto that. It was just the sales on the Fantastic Four weren't doing well, and I was the editor-in-chief, and I didn't want to be the editor-in-chief when Fantastic Four had to come off the newsstand. So I, said, I'm going to get on this book, and I'm going to supercharge this book. I'm going to make it the wildest roller coaster ride anybody has seen, and just kick it into high gear. And it worked. The fans hated it, or they claimed at the time they hated it. Nowadays, whenever I run into people, they say, "Oh, I loved your Fantastic Four." I'm thinking, "Where were you when I needed you?"
I loved it.
Well, good. I'm glad. It was Paul Ryan, a great artist, and we just had a wild time because Paul kept thinking, Paul look at the plot and go, wait a minute. How are we going to top this? And I'd say, read the next plot.
So with Spider-Man, you took over from Roger Stern, which I got to ask how that feels like, because, Roger Stern's run is also very beloved. And I feel like at the time it was also very beloved, right?
Yeah.
Did it feel?
Everybody loved Roger Stern's thing. I loved Roger Stern's thing. At the time, I thought Roger Stern was the best Spider-Man writer since Stan Lee. Guys like James Madison, have really, kicked into gear since then. But at the time, I thought Roger Stern was the best guy since Stan Lee. Matter of fact, when the editor came in, Danny Fingeroth came in and said to me, Roger Stern is leaving Spider-Man to take over the Avengers. He says, so I need a new Spider-Man writer. I said, oh, good luck with that, because you have to be an idiot to follow Roger Stern. So, famous last words.
But you did, and in the process, you discovered Ron Frenz calls you the other half of his brain.
Okay.
How do you feel about that label?
Well, I think Ron Frenz is my entire brain. Here's the secret. All the good ideas that you liked from our runs, Ron Frenz probably came up with it. All the bad ideas were probably mine. I've been writing on Ron Frenz's coattails for years.
He says the same thing about you.
But he's a liar. You can't believe a word he says. Ron and I, I don't even know how it began. We started pitching ideas, talking about the characters and pitching ideas early in our run together, and realized whenever we're discussing a story, all we care about is the story. Neither one of us have any ego. And we're not locked into any ideas. But, I've often said the cheapest thing in our business is an idea. People often say, hey, I got an idea for a novel, or I got an idea for a comic. Why don't I give you the idea and, you write it and we'll split the money. And I would say, yeah, well, I'm going to burn up 10 ideas on the first page. Ideas are the cheapest things. We're all idea factories. If we weren't idea factories, we're in the wrong business. So Ron and I, no idea is precious. I'll throw out an idea. If he comes up with a better one, we're going to go with that one. Most of the time when we're done, I have no idea who came up with what, and I don't care, as long as it's a good story. But Ron has a better memory of mine, so he's always saying, "Oh no, you came up with that. I came up with this." And I always go, "Okay," because like I say, he's got a better memory, so I trust him.
That's a great partnership. Like I feel like I hear a lot about creators fighting with other creators for credit, and it's great.
People have always said to me and Ron, how come you guys are still working together? We said, well, we do have a plan to have a falling out, but we're so busy, we have to put it off for another year or so.
You inherited the Spider-Man book with one dangling storyline, which was the identity of the Hobgoblin. You scripted over Roger's plot for his last couple issues.
His last two issues, yes.
The Hobgoblin was, to the best of my knowledge, the first Spider-Man story that people decided needed to get fixed. That the fans decided like needed to get fixed. Did you know who the Hobgoblin was supposed to be, or did you have an idea, or did you write him as someone?
I wrote him as someone. But that was not the one that, they revealed. When they revealed Dead Leads, that was basically a political thing that, it was a stunt. Somebody was trying to stick it to me and Ron.
I've heard that.
Yeah, but that was years ago.
Yeah.
So,
who did you write him as?
I always thought that the Hobgoblin was Richard Fisk, the Kingpin's son, and I thought the Rose was Roderick Kingsley. Those are what I had in mind. But
that would have been
happen.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I won't ask about the backstage stuff, but
it's too many years ago.
Yeah, but it did begin a trend for Spider-Man that continued, with people feeling like this needed to get fixed, that needed to get fixed. So I'm going to ask you a question that I'm pretty sure you've been asked a billion times. Should Spider-Man be married?
All right. Ron Frenz and I had actually started down that path. But our plan was that Mary Jane was going to leave Peter the older. Because that's the kind of thing that happens to Peter Parker. Initially I was against the wedding. When by the time the wedding came around, I became the editor-in-chief around that time. So people thought right away I was going to stop the wedding, but I thought, no, too many balls are in motion. You just go ahead with it, and we'll see if it works. And then, to my surprise, it actually worked. I have always had an attitude about comic books is you always move forward. You don't try to, correct the mistakes of the past. Ignore them. Don't worry about the mistakes of the past. Go and make new mistakes. Just keep going forward. So later on, when I came back to Spider-Man, he was married. So that's what I accepted as the status quo, and I moved forward. I know that certain old fogies didn't like him married because that's not how it was when they were children. And there's a certain segment of our creative community that always wants to restore things to the way it was when they were kids. And I think, you're behaving like a kid now. Your job is to create and come up with new things, not to repeat the past. So I thought it I thought once they were married, let them stay married. Because, all marriage did was add a further responsibility on Peter Parker. And as far as I'm concerned, all Spider-Man is about responsibility. And that's a theme that you can write, a million stories on. Never-ending stories, because it's a universal theme, because we all have conflicting responsibilities. And then at a certain point, we talked about Spider-Man getting a kid. It adds to Peter Parker's responsibility. The theme of Spider-Man is responsibility. The readership was growing up. We had new teenage characters. Peter Parker could grow up. I never read that Mephisto storyline. So I don't know if it was good or bad. I thought it was, when I heard it, I thought, I guess it's a way to go. Nothing, but it didn't hold any interest for me, so I didn't even bother to read it. And later on, I found out that everybody connected with it, disowned it, including the writer. So I don't know.
Did you so with all that having been said, was the Clone Saga in fact a way to replace Peter Parker? No. Okay.
It was never going to be replace Peter Parker. What it was going to do was introduce a single Peter Parker-like character. Ultimately, the original plan for the Clone Saga is, we didn't know he was going to be called Ben Reilly at the time, but Ben Reilly shows up. Who's the clone? Oh, we have proof that it's Ben Reilly. Oh, so Peter and Mary Jane decide to go, they're going to have a baby. They're going to go off into the sunset and live happily ever after. Ben Reilly becomes Spider-Man. Something goes wrong. Peter Parker and Mary Jane have to come back. They help Ben, and Peter and Mary Jane, they're, they now, they're going to have their baby, and they're going to live in New York, and we're going to have a married Peter Parker. And then we're also going to have a single Peter Parker. Ben Reilly, the spectacular, the Scarlet Spider. So, hey, if you want a single Peter Parker, you got it in Ben Reilly. You want to marry Peter Parker, you got it in Amazing Spider-Man. We are a rivet to our people. We're delivering both to them. And that was the plan.
There's been a lot of stuff said about the Clone Saga over the years, about how marketing stretched it out beyond what it was supposed to go. What good things came out of it? Or what did you love doing about the Clone Saga?
What good things? Spider-Girl came out of it. Spider-Girl is a direct result of the Clone Saga. I'm not the guy to ask what good things.
Okay.
The people you ask are the fans who, here it is, was it 20 or 30 years later, and people are still talking about the Clone Saga, and they're still going back to it. They're constantly referencing it and doing new stories based in the Clone Saga. I know Dramatics is writing a 6-part thing with Ben Reilly in there. It must have struck a nerve, because here it is 30 years later and people are still interested in it. So I think we did we did good work, because otherwise it would have been forgotten.
Yeah. That was actually when I became a Spider-Man fan. So
the Clone Saga, a lot of people claim they hated it, but they read a lot of it. I always remember one time I went to a comic book convention during the time of the Clone Saga. And, you go up to the table, you give your name, they give you your badge to get into the comic. So I give the guy my name, he says, Tom DeFalco, oh, you're part of the Clone Saga. I love the Clone Saga. And the guy next to him says, really, I hate the Clone Saga. And within 2 or 3 minutes, everybody behind the table is arguing about the Clone Saga. Giving me examples of why it's great and why it's a piece of shit.
In front of you.
In front of me. And meanwhile, I'm all I want is my badge to get into the convention. I gotta get to the table so they can hand me my badge, and I turn around and I realize all of the professionals standing behind me are now arguing about the Clone Saga. So people in front of me are arguing, people behind me are arguing, and I'm thinking, hey, people obviously care about this story, so we're doing a good job.
Absolutely. Do you remember when it went off the rails?
Again, it's hard for me to know. When I was working on it, I kept thinking, this is going on too long, and I had problems with certain storylines. I turned in a plot and find out that the plot had to be for 2 issues instead of 1 issue.
Oh, wow.
And I'd say, okay, well, I have to redo that plot to add more stuff. And I was constantly running around, trying to play catch up with that stuff. So I was too deeply, involved, emotionally with the characters and everything. So I'm not the guy to ask about when it went off the rails. I do know that a couple of years later, Howard Mackey had found his old notes on the Clone Saga, and spoke to Ralph Macchio and Joe Quesada and said, "Yeah, I got my own notes." And they said, "Really? Send them in." He said, "Well," he said, "maybe we'll." They said, "Send them in. Maybe we'll do a special." And he said, "Well, actually, Tom and I were thinking of writing a limited series." And then Joe said, "Really, you and Tom? Do it." And then Ralph called me up and said, "Hey, I understand you and Howard are working on a project." And I said, "Oh yeah," because I had no idea what he was talking about. "Oh yeah, me and Howard are working on a project. So you really want to do the Clone Saga again?" And I said, "Let me talk to Howard." And around that time, I had to reread. Years had passed, so I had to reread everything, and I was surprised that, when you're working on it, you're dealing with all sorts of, angst and emotions and what you're going through in your life at the time, and that's what you remember. And you're not the most objective person about how the material was, came out. I, reread this stuff and thought, man, I thought this stuff was a lot worse than it was, but it's actually, some of it's actually pretty good. Yeah, certain stories I look at, yeah, that could have been better. That could have been better. Most of the time when you look at something, you can always see how it could have been better. But I was surprised that it was a lot better than I remembered, which often happens to me. There are certain stories that were done during terrible periods of my life. So I think of these as terrible stories. And then I go back and find out, yeah, it's not that bad.
It's not the same as when you're reading it later.
Yeah.
So what was it like working with Sal? I will ask you that in the present tense later. What was it like working with Sal? And then like sometime through the Clone Saga, Bill Sienkiewicz comes in and starts inking him.
Yeah. I got conned into doing that. They needed somebody, initially to do some plots for Tom DeFalco, who's new writer starting out. And Sal put his arm around me and said, "Hey, buddy, I know you can do plots and do them quickly. So how about you help me out a little bit here?" And there are certain people in the world I could say no to, but Sal is not one of them. Sal is a very close friend. He's a good buddy. One of the true gentlemen of our industry, and such a great artist. Sal, whatever Sal asks me to do, I have to do it. There are a handful of people like that.
It's awesome.
So I started to do the plots. I will tell you that Todd DeFalco looked at those plots and said to me, "These read like love letters to Sal." And then Todd decided to go off and write a different Spider-Man book, and Sal said, "Well, of course you're staying." So I said, "Yeah, of course I'm staying." And I thought, I'm so used to that. I had these 5 hours of sleep that I was getting every night. And I thought, man, I really look forward to those 5 hours. But I guess I could live off of 4.
If you're talking about how you would be an idiot to follow Roger Stern on Amazing Spider-Man, what was it like following Walt Simonson on the Mighty Thor?
Again, I didn't intend to follow. I don't do cosmic. I knew that everybody was going to hate my run because everybody loved Walt Simonson's run. I loved Walt Simonson's run, but I also knew that I couldn't do the kind of stuff that Walt did. I couldn't do it. I didn't have the background in mythology or anything else like that. And I'm more interested in doing comic book superheroes. He was more interested in doing mythology heroes. And I said to Ron, if we take this assignment, everybody's going to hate us. And Ron said, "Well, you're not that likable to anybody. Anyway, people are going to hate us." So what the heck? Let's go ahead. And we're on tour. We had a great time. I know a lot of our readers still like the material. Look, comparing Walt Simonson's run to our run, it's like comparing oranges to watermelons.
It's not the same at all. No,
not the same at all. I hope that you can like both because, like I said, I really love what Walt did.
I have them both in arm's distance right now, but I did notice that in Walt's run, I mean, in your run, as well as on your first run with Ron on Spider-Man, Ron is such a great, how do I put this? Ron is such a great cover artist. Like I didn't think at that point, like, I binged, all of Spider-Man at one point in the last couple of years. And I'm like, at some point, nobody could really draw like Steve Ditko until Ron Frenz gets on him. And then you guys get on Thor and he's just getting all of this Kirby, like really exactly. Like, was that intentional on your part to like get, put it to like bring back the Kirby feel and the Ditko feel in those books?
That's how Ron wanted to draw it. So both of us felt when we took over both books that we wanted to get back to basics. We wanted to, our attitude about Spider-Man is we wanted to, focus on Peter Parker, who is a guy who can see the dark cloud behind every silver lining. He can find the dark cloud. He can always find out how he failed, even when he succeeds. And then with Thor, we wanted to get back into, a guy. I always looked at Thor as, like a deli owner. His father has a nice little deli, and he wants his son to, inherit the business. And the son looks at the deli and says, "Okay, Papa, we're going to franchise. We're going to do, delis all over the place. Oh, hey, our family business is we protect Asgard." So, yeah, okay, but we can also protect Earth. We can also protect Mars. We can also protect the whole universe. We don't have to just focus on Asgard. We can protect everybody. And that's how I saw Thor.
So with Thor and with Spider-Man, you did go, you did end up going back to basics because you introduced Eric Masterson. So what is up with you giving Ron like these characters and then making sure he doesn't draw the classic version of those characters? Just
Yeah, you know, again, our job is to create. We're supposed to, you know, open new doors, you know, come up with new ideas, come up with new characters. It's weird when Ron and I did Spider-Man and when we started with Thor, we kept introducing new villains because we thought that's what we were supposed to do. And everybody kept saying, when are you going to do Dr. Octopus? When are you going to do this? When are you going to do that? And I said to Ron, we don't want to do what other guys do. Other guys, when they take on the book, they always go, I want to do my Dr. Octopus story. I want to do my Green Goblin story. I want to do my, you know, such and such story. If you do, you know, if you do Captain America, I have to do the Red Skull and the Cosmic Cube. I have to do this. I have to do that. We don't want to do that. We want to create new stuff and chart, you know, new horizons because that's what Stan and Jack did. That's what Stan and Steve did. That's, you know, that's what we should be doing. That's why they pay us the mediocre bucks.
I love the differences between your answers because he was like, I had nothing to do with that. I was the getaway driver. I didn't come up with those ideas. Who would you say is your most popular creation? Is it Silver Sable?
You know, I would have said Silver Sable, except I was having a discussion with somebody. I think, you know, my career is going to be reduced to two characters.
Thunderstrike and Silver Sable?
No, Peter Porker, Spider-Ham, and the Bombastic Bagman. Those are the characters that people are going to know because those are the characters that appear in toys and video games and everything else like that.
That's true.
But I think Silver Sable, I don't know, Silver Sable, Spider Girl, Thunderstrike. It's up to you guys to figure out what it is. I mean, I love all of these characters.
How do you? Sorry.
You can't work on these things night and day, for weeks at a time, unless you commit fully to them.
How do you feel about the fact that we got to a point where, I was playing this like to death, like 2 years ago. Silver Sable is a key character in this. And I'm like, I can't believe we've got into to a point in time where people like Silver Sable, the Black Cat, they're in really prominent pop culture stuff. Like, because when I was growing up, it was always just like, Spider-Man, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman didn't even have a thing. So
probably not even Spider-Man that much.
Except for the cartoon. Yeah. Really quickly, because I know we have 10 minutes left. Was your run on Fantastic Four with Paul Ryan? Did you start writing it going in with the idea that Alicia Masters was Elijah Laserfist? Because it was such an elegant retcon. There are moments in John Byrne's run that completely work with Alicia as Elijah in mind.
Yeah. I'd like to take credit for Alicia as Elijah. However, at some point, John Byrne had Johnny and Alicia, start to date and stuff like that. And a lot of the old fans, me included, thought, yeah, this is ridiculous. John, so Alicia looks like Sue. Why would Johnny be dating somebody who looks like his sister? But John was doing a great job with Fantastic Four. It was his run. And one day, I think I was at a pool It was a summer day. We're relaxing at a pool with Ralph Macchio and Mark Romuald. And Ralph and Mark are talking about how can we fix this, John Yalisha thing. How can we fix this John Yalisha thing? And they said, what if Alicia, what if Alicia is a scroll? That it isn't the real Alicia, it's a scroll. And they both got very excited about the idea. And they turned to me and they said, Tom, what do you think of this idea? And I said, I don't care. I said, listen, Fantastic Four, I'm just reading the book. I'm not writing the book. None of my business. Because, when I'm reading the book, I'm not, and I was enjoying what John was doing. So I was a happy camper. And I had no illusions that at any point in my life I was going to be writing Fantastic Four. Actually, a couple of years later, Fantastic Four came open, and I started to put a pitch together. And then I ran into Chris Claremont, and he was putting a pitch together. And Chris told me what he wanted to do, and I told him what I wanted to do. But I liked what Chris wanted to do better. So I called up the editor and said, I'm going to drop out. I think you should go with Chris. And ultimately they didn't go with Chris. I forget who they went with, but whatever. And then a couple of years after that, Fantastic Four came open, and I'm, suddenly I'm going to be writing it. And Ralph Macchio said, yeah, Tom, I want you to write this book. Do you have any ideas? And I said, no. Because I just found out I'm going to write the book. I have no idea. I have to go home and come up with some. But I said, I like the idea you came up with where Alicia might be a scroll. He goes, what idea? I said, you and Rooney came up with that. And he didn't remember it, but I thought, yeah, I thought it's a good idea. Let's try it. So we did it.
It's like that John Goldwater Archie Digest thing.
Yeah. Came back to 1 years later, but it was their idea.
Was it easier to follow Walt Simonson on Fantastic Four than it was to follow him on Thor?
No, it's never easy to follow Walt Simonson. You got to be out of your mind to follow. My problem is I'm too stupid to know how stupid it is to follow these guys. The first couple of books that I followed at DC, I followed Dave McElwain, who's another great writer. Yeah, okay. I remember Dave was on this book called For the Unconquered, and the editor gives me the books. Joe Orlando, he gives me the books. He says, read the books, and I read all the books, and he says, so how are you going to fix this thing? The sales weren't doing great. And I said, Joe, I don't know how to fix this thing. This thing is great. It's beautifully written. I can't figure out why it's not selling, because it's, Dave is doing terrific work. Joe Orlando says, yeah, that's what I thought. Says, I was hoping you'd be a wise guy and tell me all the things they did that were wrong. I said, he didn't do anything wrong. He was just great. So I did a couple of issues, and the book got canceled.
I feel like your run on Fantastic Four gets disparaged quite a bit because of your use of 90s tropes, like the jackets, the guns, Sue's costume. But I also felt like even at the time, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, like even at the time, you were kind of commenting on those trends by putting them in there, because they were, even in the book, the characters were commenting on like, what's up with the jackets? Oh my God, that's a big gun. Or like Sue's costume especially was like, there's a plot point behind it. Like Reed is neglecting her, and she's got malice in her brain. So why do you think this went? Am I right?
Are you saying that I was not taking these things as seriously as I should have been taking these things? That I might have been poking fun at my media?
It's almost like you were having fun.
What?
It's almost like you were having fun. It's like that cover. It's like that cover of Thor with "No More Mr. Nice Guy."
Come on.
Like why do you think that detractors of these runs take these things so seriously.
I have no idea why they take them so seriously, but yeah, no more Mr. Mr. Nice Guy. You can't believe how much negative mail we got about that cover, and of course, everybody bought the book and told us how much they hated the cover. They loved the insides, but they hated the cover. And one time we did this cover where a couple Thors from different areas. Here come the Thor Corps. We just threw that. Ron, I think, came up with that cover copy. Here come the Thor Corps. Okay. So that book goes out and it sells like crazy. And the sales department comes to me and says, "So when are you going to do a Thor Corps comic book?" And I look at him and go, "What's the Thor Corps?" I said, "That was a joke." I said, "It was a joke." He said, "No. So very well. I think it's not a joke. I think we have to do a Thor Corps comic book." So we had to do a Thor Corps comic book.
It's hilarious.
Yeah. Many of my bad jokes have come back to haunt me, like Peter Porker Spider-Ham.
Hey, how do you feel about that Peter Porker Spider-Ham is so famous now because of Into the Spider-Verse?
First off, I think the movie Into the Spider-Verse is the best of all the Spider-Man movies.
I agree.
Better than all the live-action ones in that. I had no idea Peter Porker was in that film. About a week or two before the film came out, somebody called me up to interview me about Peter Porker. Where did it come from? Blah, blah, blah. So I told him the whole history, wrapped up the interview. And I said to him, not for nothing, but why are you asking me about Peter Porker? And he said to me, have you heard about the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse? I said, yeah, I've heard about it. I said, it's funny, for some reason, Marvel invited me to the California premiere. I said I had too much work, so I couldn't go. But they invited me to come out to California for the premiere. And I said, I have no idea why. I said, they didn't tell you? And I said, tell me what? Well, Peter Porker's in the movie. And I thought, what? How the heck can Peter Porker be in a Spider-Man movie? And then I found out, and they did a great job. And John Mulaney was fabulous as Peter Porker.
I hope you got good royalties out of that one.
A couple of bucks here, a couple of bucks there. Every little bit helps. I'm a poor freelancer who most of the time I don't know where my next meal is coming from. My wife orders out a lot. She almost never tells me where we're going to get it.
Well, we do know where your next meal is coming from because you are I don't know how to do this for Indiegogo because usually I would just say kickstarting. You are on Indiegogo for the right project.
The right project, yes.
Yeah. And you are working with Ron Frenz and Sal Buscema. Can you tell us?
Maybe for the last time.
Maybe for the last time. Is it really for the last time? Because I've heard this before from Cover Copy, Mr. Tom DeFalco.
Well, I think this time it could be the last time because one of us, and I don't want to point fingers at Sal, one of us wants to retire, and he thinks that Ron and I are going to let him because he says he's tired of doing this stuff, and and he's done it for so many years and done it so great. I think we're going to have to let him, maybe.
Okay.
That's why I say maybe for the last time, because once we start working on the next issue, we're going to have to send them Xeroxes, and who knows.
Can you tell us what the Right Project is all about?
The Right Project, it's on Indiegogo now. It's the basic concept is a scientist has come up with a way to give holograms mass. And a young video gamer futzes around with the computer program and turns it into a superhero who he is mentally and kind of physically connected to. And we have this hoo-ha action. Right stands for reality integrated graphitic hologram technology, or IGHT. And we're doing a bunch of hoo-ha action. You know how earlier I said that the problem with comic books today is, you know, you're getting one scene in a comic book. You know, there's part 1 of 6 or something. Well, in our first issue, we have 2 11-page stories, 2 complete 11-page stories that tell you everything you need to know. And each of those 11-page stories have more action and more stuff going on than most 22-page comic books. And I say that without hesitation. If we hit our stretch goal, we're going to throw in a 5-page story. A superhero 5-page story. Can you do that? Yes, we can. And yes, we did. That was actually a reprint. This is a project Ron and I had come up with years ago, and it was a way for us to just have a good time and you know, and play with the craft the way we wanted to play with the craft. A lot of action, a lot of angst, a lot of characterization, and complete stories. And we kept saying, yeah, we're gonna publish this. You know, we're gonna get around to publishing this in our spare time. And years go by, we had no spare time. And then recently, we actually were contacted by this company that does augmented reality and avatars and that sort of stuff. And they said, yeah, if you have any sort of comic book character, you know, we could do all sorts of computer special effects on the comic books. And we said, you know what? We actually have a character that fits into that because it's all about video games and avatars and all this other crazy nonsense. So if you like, you know, funny game comic books, or as I like to say, hoo-ha action, you know, the official title of Tom DeFalco and Ron Frenz's The Right Project. It's on Indiegogo. I think we're getting close to our stretch goal. You're gonna get a free mini comic, and you know, and you'll get 3 stories in the first issue.
I notice it's called Tom DeFalco and Ron Frenz's Indiegogo, and this might be the last time you work with Sal. Does that mean you will continue this with Ron Frenz?
Ron and I have already started working on a second issue because we can't stop ourselves. So
that's great to hear.
You know, I keep thinking I'm done with comics. You know, because comics are, it's a mental and physical grind. You know, most people don't realize how much work actually goes into producing a comic. And I keep thinking that, you know, I'm getting kind of old for this stuff. I have to, you know, focus on, you know, lighter work like novels and screenplays that pay a lot better. Anyway, you know, I keep getting suckered back because, you know, the bottom line is I love comics. I just love comics, and I love working with Ron because he makes it just such a joy. I love working with Sal. You know, I hope Sal is around, you know, for another 20 years because I need him in my life because he's such a great guy. But if Sal feels it's time to retire, then it's time to retire. You know, and I look at it and I think, wait a minute, 2022, I've been in this business for 50 years. 50 years. That's longer than you've been alive. I've been in this business.
That's true.
You know, and I think, you know, at some point you got to call it quits. Maybe when I've been in the business 60 years.
It's the same. I told you I binged all of Spider-Man, you know, the first 200 issues of Spider-Man at some point. I get to Sal's first issue and I'm like, Sal Buscema's been doing Spider-Man for this long?
Absolutely. Yes, he has.
Yeah.
And he just recently, he's been working with Ron on this comic book called The Blue Baron. They've done, I think, 4 or 5 issues together, and something called Heroes Union. So there's still plenty of Ron and Sal stuff out there.
Awesome. So we have to postpone your falling out with Ron Frenz before for a while further.
Well, Ron and I are just so busy, we just don't have time to fool out. We're going to put that on the back burner.
You'll have to put it as a Facebook invite at some point. Tom DeFalco and Ron Frenz falling out. December 2027.
We'll see. If you've interviewed Ron, you know what a great guy he is.
He is, yeah.
He really is a terrific guy. It's hard not to, not to love working with the guy. Like I said, this Right project, we have a great time with it. We always hope that if we're having a good time, the readers will have a good time. So I hope all your listeners will hook onto the Indiegogo, support this, and let 2 beginners try to make their mark in comics yet again.
I will put the link down below. Thank you, Mr. Tom DeFalco, for joining me today, and thank you for everything you've done for comics, and quite honestly for being such a big part of my childhood. Yeah, so thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Thanks for being there.